what is the mission of St. Albans? We have a mission statement that's on our website, but when the word mission shows up, sometimes people think of missionaries, right? So I have on the screen, there are two films, The Mission, good old De Niro, Silence, and this book, The Poisonwood Bible, Barbara Kingsolver. These are all stories about more, let's say, traditional ideas of when folks think of a missionary, someone from a long time ago, or maybe more recently in Barbara Kingsolver's novel, going to somewhere foreign, going to another people group that haven't heard about what the church is or haven't heard about Jesus and are bringing the gospel message. This is kind of the popular portrayal of what mission work is, or a missionary. You might have heard that term. I know that all of us come from different backgrounds, and some of y'all might be a little more familiar with that term or have heard that term more frequently than others. So the whole reason behind traditional, or when we think of mission work as Jesuits going to South America or Japan, or in Barbara Kingsolver's novel, Baptists going to Congo, why do Christians do that? And a lot of mission work that the church does comes from, its root is in this passage from Matthew 28. It's the very end of the Gospel of Matthew. And Jesus, after he rises from the grave, addresses his disciples with these words: "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you." If you've got an NIV Bible, it'll say the Great Commission over this section, which is really nice. It's a nice little header. Not all Bibles have these headers. But this is the basis for mission work in the church, historically and even still today. In the early centuries of Christianity, mission work looked a lot like what we read about in the book of Acts. Paul or someone is going to a town and then going to a synagogue in that town. These are people that would be familiar with the story of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, that section of the Bible that we have. And then this missionary would be telling them about how Christ is the fulfillment of this This is what we see in the book of Acts. Paul goes and argues at the synagogues, and sometimes it works. A lot of times it doesn't. He gets beaten up a lot and kind of like rocks thrown on him. It's a great, very exciting thing. But so that's early mission work. As Christianity kind of progressed, mission work looked a lot like translation. Translating the Bible, translating the Old Testament, the New Testament, these books that were coming together to form the Bible into other languages. If you're a student of Russian or Ukrainian or anything, you know the Cyrillic alphabet. Cyril is the Christian missionary this is church tradition, not necessarily historical tradition, that Cyril is the one who created the Cyrillic alphabet in order to translate the Old and New Testament into a script that people could read in Georgia, in the Caucasus, and in what we now kind of, this whole region that uses the Cyrillic alphabet. So this is what early mission work looked like: interacting with the Bible and interacting with people who were outside of one specific, maybe people group. Christianity in the early days did not necessarily have to do with one's nation, or we might say today one's ethnicity or people group. I'm going to maybe keep saying people group because that's a little easier to talk about, cleaner that way. Cleaner in terms of description and not having to talk here for all day before I want Tim to come up. So I'm like blasting through this. But this is what early mission work in the church looked like. And today we would kind of classify that as more evangelism. Maybe, are we familiar with this word? Not evangelicalism, but evangelism. Are we? Okay. It's not necessarily a bad word. I know some of your stomachs turned when you saw that on the screen because it brings up these ideas of you getting cornered at HEB. Have you heard about Jesus? And you're like, I have. Leave me alone. I really just need to get home before my ice cream melts. Or just getting all of the stickers on your car and then underneath your wipers and that kind of thing. Evangelism, though, is what I've just been talking about. these people, these disciples, these followers of Christ that are going to others and talking about the work that Jesus has done, not just within their lives, but and introducing them to the church in other ways too. It gets a little messy, at least, in the ways that we think about it because of our historical context and where we show up. But that's more evangelism. But mission and outreach are kind of these two other things. And we'll be talking about mission as a way to approach people that are in our direct orbit about who Jesus is, and outreach as more how to be involved in the lives, the actual lives of the people around us and in our community. And today we'll hone in on mission. So when we look at the mission of the church, the mission of St. Albans, and even the mission as it's talked about in the Episcopal Church, and this is not just necessarily specific to the Episcopal Church. Other Christian denominations, I think, would agree and with this kind of definition, this parts of mission. So number one, mission is recognizing the image of God in all people. Number two, remembering Jesus' call to serve the least of these, the poor. And three, respectfully serving our neighbors, the people that we live with in Waco, in McLennan County, in Texas, in tangible ways, in ways where their needs are met and that they may flourish and ultimately serve others. This is how we at St. Albans and in the Episcopal Church think about mission. And I'll get into each three of these with a little bit of detail here. In Genesis 1, going to point 1 here, the image of God, the imago Dei or Dei, depending on how you want to correct me afterward. The imago Dei, God says to, in chapter 1, verse 26 in Genesis, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion." 27. "So God created humans in his image. In the image of God he created them, and male and female he created them." So this idea, God creates humans in God's image, is something that theologically is a really meaty thing to grab onto. And it gets grabbed onto in a lot of ways. But if we hold that all of humanity, if you, me, and everyone that's ever lived and everyone that's going to live is made in the image of God, then that can mean that we need to treat those people in a certain way. If we are treating others like they are God, or like they are made in God and beloved by God and are seen by God and said that person is good, which is what happens at the beginning of creation, then that kind of says some things. It gives for us a principle on how to treat other people. And so that's kind of number one. Number two, the least of these, thinking about those that are poor, that are at the bottom of society. People, Jesus in his life, in Matthew 25, there's this parable that I'll talk about in a moment. But when Jesus hangs out with people, he gets in trouble sometimes because he's hanging out with prostitutes, he's hanging out with drunkards. He gets called a glutton, which is kind of like, I don't know, that was me in college. What about y'all? Like, I don't know. Not that I'm Jesus, but no, not at all. My mom, I'm glad she's not here or watching this online right now. But Jesus hangs out with a lot of different people, and many of them are poor. Many of them, when he's with the poor, he's tending to them, he's healing them. He's telling them about the good news, that God is for them, not against them. And when he's with the rich, he's telling them to stop stealing, stop lying, stop being greedy. Good things that we often need to hear. But in Matthew 25, there's this parable. And he paints this picture of all of the nations, all of the peoples gathering before God, and God separating the sheep from the goats, and these people that come up talk to God, and they say this. "The king will then say to those at his right hand, 'Come, you that are blessed by my Father, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing,'" or if you're from Texas, naked. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. These are the things. You clothed me, you fed me, you visited me. I was naked and on Waco Drive, and you took care. Like, these are the things that are at the center of the good news that Christ brings. It's not just this happy idea. It's not just this thing that's given without any actual grounding in the world. But these are tangible things. And finally, respecting the people who we serve at St. Albans and in the Episcopal Church, respecting these people's dignity in all that we do, in all that the church does, respecting the dignity of others is at the heart of what we read in the Bible, what we read in James, and what we say. Well, you'll get to say next week, actually. If you show up for church at the 11:15, there's going to be 5 baptisms. And I'll talk about a thing that we all get to say after the creed in just a moment. But this passage in James is talking to his Christian community about acts of favoritism. And he says this. He says, don't play favorites, but he also says that, has not God chosen the poor in the world to be rich in faith and to be heirs of the kingdom that he promised to those who loved him? But you have dishonored the poor. Is it not the rich who oppress you? Is it not they who drag you into court? Is it not they that blaspheme the excellent name that was invoked over you? So the poor as people in James is a text that comes up again and again. And next week, at the portion of our baptismal service, there are these things that get said after the creed. And this is the last one. There's kind of 4 questions that the celebrant will ask to the congregation. And this is one of them. Will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? I will, with God's help. With God's help is kind of key with all of these questions that get asked. But it's important that these promises get made, not just for ourselves and to make us feel good, but that we're making these promises like around other people and in our community and in the life of the church, because these promises are for the life of the world. So these 3 things guide our mission in a lot of ways at St. Albans: the Imago Dei, serving the least of these, and respecting the dignity of all humans. And so when we do mission work around the church and outside the walls and even within the walls of the church, these are 3 things that come up and that are kind of some of our guiding principles. So this week you'll get to hear from Tim Packer at The Cove. Next week, Andrea Zimmerman will be here to talk about foster care in McLennan County in Texas and in Waco, which is changing a lot. And then the week after that, we have Cedar Ridge Elementary and to be determined. I need to get another one for that. So we're going to have people every week, though, talking about the ways in which we partner with these folks in Waco. So, Tim, you can come up, and why don't you sit in front of these folks right here, and I'll sit right here. And I have a couple questions for you. Just a couple of questions. Okay, that's right. Do you need a water or anything?
No, I'm good.
Okay, great. So Tim, why don't you just tell me first off, tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are, just casual things, your life, where you went to elementary school. What's your background? How did you get into nonprofit work?
Sure, yeah. So I was born in Aberdeen in 1980, that far back? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure. Why not?
Yeah, so tobacco, obviously I'm not from around these parts. I think most of the people who are here know that. I spent most of my life in the UK, born in Scotland, lived in London, North Yorkshire for a bit, and then did my undergraduate degree at Edinburgh University, and that's where I met Anna Lauren, and then found out I already had quite a few links to Waco, apart from Anna Lauren already, and several years later, actually, 20 years later, here we are in Waco. And so my first degree was computer science, which is definitely not working with high school students experiencing homelessness. But I've subsequently gone on to do a degree in social science, economics, politics, and then my doctoral work is in social policy and developmental psychology. But missions work has kind of been part of my family's blood for multiple generations. Even there's photos of me when I was about 2 years old in Peru, when my mum and dad went with this question of were they going to serve in Peru. My mum's a doctor, my dad is an accountant stroke local government administration specialist. He's kind of a niche market and international development. But throughout my childhood and teenage years and even to today, my family have sought to serve across the globe in various locations. And so as we almost ended up in Peru, but it was around the time the Shining Path was really active and international children were particular targets. And so the decision was made not to go at that time. My parents have been in Azerbaijan, Pakistan, Cyprus, and most recently they worked in Kosovo together for about 16 years. And then have also served in Georgia in the Caucasus. And so my dad, I won't say he speaks Cyrillic, but he can definitely recognize some of it. And then latterly, just about 3 weeks ago, my dad returned from his latest stint in Kosovo and is now retired for a second time. So, so I've grown up in mission. I've grown up in and around missions work, but also grown up in a family who fundamentally believe that the gospel changes all of your life, and that they were specifically called to use the skills that they have as a doctor and as an accountant stroke administrator to serve people around them. And so the idea of tent making, so if you've grown up in an evangelical church, you probably heard a lot about tent making, but...
is that phrase familiar to anyone?
Yeah, so Paul was St. Paul was a tent maker, and that's what he would do. He would go to these cities around the Mediterranean and preach the gospel, build churches, but he would often fund his way, at least earlier on in his ministry, by making tents. So this term around tent making came as you use the skills that you've got, and in that context, draw people to Christ.
Yeah.
So how did I get in? It was a dream. When I had graduated my computer science degree, Anne-Laura and I were working on a gap year program with the Navigators in Edinburgh, doing student ministry. And one night I had a very vivid dream about my attitude towards the poor and particularly towards the homeless. So very briefly setting the context, I was walking with some friends through a famous part of Edinburgh called the Grass Market. It's where the Covenanters, again, kind of tied to theology, a large number of them were hung. And there's a memorial there, but it's a well-known night spot now in Edinburgh. And I was leading my group of friends, eating a pizza, and a homeless gentleman was sat on the floor and asked for a slice of the pizza because he was hungry. And I led my friends in laughing at him and mocking him and walked away from him. And shortly after that, I dropped the pizza. It falls flat down on the ground, and there's lots of swear words at that point in my dream. I don't generally use swear words, but in my dream, I have a very foul mouth. And keep walking, and then I look back and I see that this homeless man has got up and has come and picked up this pizza that's face down on the ground and is hungrily eating it. Eating like somebody who hasn't eaten for a while. And I lead my friends in mocking him again, look at you, like you're the lowest of the low. And I wake up quite suddenly, whoa, what was that about? And there was a prayer meeting with the students that morning, and we were in a little group of triplet, and I shared the dream with them and asked for them to pray and say, okay, God, are you trying to communicate something to me through this dream? And one of the people that was there was like, actually, I'm going to training today on homelessness and mental health. Why don't you come? And so I did. And it was at a soup kitchen kind of advice point in the city of Edinburgh. And the manager of that kind of took me under his wing. I started volunteering. Then went on into working in a night shelter in Edinburgh over the winter months, and then emergency housing, community support. But kept on asking, like, how do we do, I can help you in your housing situation, but how do we do something about homelessness? Yeah. How do we make the situation better for people in Edinburgh? Yeah. And so ended up working as a funder in the city of Edinburgh, commissioning services, so designing, needs analysis, evaluating them, did some community-based, multidisciplinary work, and then when we moved to Waco in 21, I'd met Kelly Atkinson, who's also attends St. Albans. I'd met her at a previous visit and called her up and said, hey, anybody need my skill sets in Waco that you know of? And they're like, oh, actually, we need a chief operating officer. And so that's how I'm here.
Casually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about like what the Cove does in Waco, and maybe how it came to be in existence in Waco.
So the Cove officially opened its doors in 2016, and so next year, now it's next year rather than 2 years' time, we'll be having our 10th anniversary, which is a pretty significant milestone for any non-profit or any business. And so the Cove came about initially, or the idea of the Cove was way back in 2011, 2012, 2013, when Dr. Cheryl Pooler, who now teaches at the Garland School of Social Work, but at the time was the homeless liaison officer at Waco ISD. And she and others in the community recognized that students who are experiencing homelessness had some support, but not very much, and definitely didn't really have any support outside of the school environment to help them just navigate the challenges of being a high schooler. And added into that also the challenges of having stable housing, being safe wherever they're staying, getting access to the resources that they need in order to survive the school environment. So for example, a lot of our youth go through backpacks very quickly, and so we need to have a ready supply of backpacks because they can't afford to just replace them.
Tell me, before you keep going, how do teens even start experiencing homelessness? Because normally I feel like I hear about it with other age groups, but not teen homelessness specifically.
Okay. So I will come to that. So the Cove works with 14 to 18-year-olds who are high schoolers, essentially. And we have 5 kind of core services or ways that we interact with youth. The primary one that most people know about is our after-school program, and so that's Monday through Thursday during term time, and then daytime during the summer break. And that's where we're doing educational work, meals, skills work, nurturing activities, having some fun, but also it's one of our primary contacts for case management with our youth. And so that's where we're navigating, okay, where are you staying tonight? Or how do we get you your ID? Or, oh, you've just disclosed some abuse and neglect here, and so what do we have to do with that? And then our second kind of main way of interacting with youth is our school-based outreach. So Monday through Friday, we're out on the campuses in Waco ISD, La Vega ISD, Midway ISD, and actually this week I have a meeting with Connolly ISD to look at setting up a memorandum of understanding with them so we could be on campus there as well, which I'm really excited about. And that's primarily about doing case management, but also meeting youth. The schools is primarily where we meet youth. We also have tutoring, paid tutoring at school and on campus and at the Cove's facility. And we're also a drop-in Monday through Friday, so youth can just show up on their door. This last week, we've had 3 youth show up on our door that needed emergency housing. One with a baby that was about 3 months old. And so thankfully we were able to help them access stays in hotels. They were all 18, funded through what's called the Housing Stability Program that Waco Housing Authority manage. And then the last one is we have a new program called the Family Advocate, and this is recognizing that, coming back to your question about how do youth become homeless, is that for most of our youth, the kind of the presenting kind of need or issue is usually a relational need. There's been a breakdown in the family relationship somehow. And so we've created this family advocate role to help do problem-solving approaches with families to try and just relieve some of the pressure and some of the tension in the family environment so that a problem like you're leaving the place a mess doesn't become a, you're leaving the place a mess, you're not listening to me, get out. For those who have teenagers, that's a difficult conversation. But then we ask this broader question of like, why do teens become homeless? And in Waco, in Texas, across the globe, in terms of kind of Western democratic nations, the primary reason is poverty. And it's because households are financially struggling and dealing with the consequences that come of that through mental health, criminal justice involvement, physical health needs, just not having enough money in your pocket to pay your rent or to buy food or to pay your utilities. And so in Waco, there is a very strong demographic trend is that most of the youth that we see, about 70 or 80% of the youth we see are black or Hispanic. And vastly come from either East Waco or North Waco or bits of South Waco. That's where our youth come from. But we also have youth in Midway and out in Belmead and Elmont and Hewitt. We've served students from 10 school districts in the heart of Texas region. So Riesel, McGregor, and elsewhere.
Yeah. How many students are you serving in a given week?
In a given week, it really varies. So I'll start from a bigger picture. So last year, in 2024, we had our busiest year ever, and we served 190 different youth. Wow. We count the number of unique youth that we serve, but also how often we serve youth. Mm-hmm. And I meant to run the number this morning to check the exact number, but we're a significant percentage ahead, about 30% ahead in terms of the number of contacts of youth with youth. So we're seeing more youth more often. Yeah. In terms of the actual numbers total of homeless youth in our community, it's really hard to predict or to count that, and there's a few reasons for that. One is a lot of it goes hidden because youth's homelessness is being doubled up with another family, so it's one family living with another family because they economically can't afford independent housing. It also looks like couch surfing, so a youth will bounce around multiple family members, friends. We've had youth sleeping in the backs of trucks, in cars, in abandoned buildings. We have one youth who we're serving at the moment who's one of 19 in a 3-bed, 1-bath house. So getting an overall number is quite hard, but Waco ISD, K through 12, last year had about 1,000 students that were considered homeless. Wow. And that's, it's about 7% of the school population in Waco ISD. So it's a significant number.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the students that are coming in, some of the things they get to do. I know you mentioned a little bit,
sure.
But maybe even a through line. You don't have to talk about individuals, but what are the commonalities in these stories?
So, the commonality, one of the big commonalities is that they are struggling at school. Attendance, achievement, just basic skills, like the reading and writing level of our youth is low. And largely there are exceptions, of course, generalizing, but so almost all of our youth are struggling academically. And when you look at the data in Texas, students who experience homelessness graduate about 10 to 20 percentage points lower than their kind of the general cohort. And so, if, a couple of years ago, the graduation rate across Texas was kind of in the lower 80s, but if you were homeless, it was in the kind of mid-60s. And so the main reason often for that is attendance credits. They get so far behind that they give up, or it feels too much to try and overcome. And So there's that educational side of it, and what comes alongside of that, and it's like where my kind of developmental psychology hat comes in, is that all of the skills that go around being in that stage of the transition to adulthood, all of those skills about delayed gratification, about emotion regulation, about problem solving, about future planning. There's evidence and data now about the impact of homelessness on youth's working memory. So, think if you're going to the doctors for a procedure and you have that kind of, how many surgeries have you had, and do you have this, and do you have that? The idea of filling out a form like that becomes physiologically harder because your working memory is struggled. So, a lot of our youth are coming from families that are highly disrupted, one of the main challenges we have is interacting with parents and trying to just navigate what's in the best interest of their youth. The word of homelessness is very unpopular. It's a hard word to think about, because most people's idea is, you think of homeless, you think of an older gentleman with a substance misuse problem, living under the 17th Street Bridge, or something like that. You don't think of a 14, 15-year-old teenager who's just trying to work out how to beat his friends at Fortnite. And when you say, oh, your youth is homeless, the understanding for the parent is, you're telling me I'm a failure. And that is not the thing to say to a parent. However, we do have to have some really honest conversations with them sometimes about actually the decisions that you are making. So, for example, we had a youth in last week again whose dad is taking his food stamp benefits, is taking them from him as rent and then selling it for drugs. So there's these highly problematic behaviors there. And so I've kind of wandered off from your question, but what do we do? So,
that was great.
So the Cove has 3 outcomes that we work towards: stability, housing stability, and developmental stability. Our second outcome is hope in education and employment. And so, like I said, graduation is hard for any high schooler, but especially if you're experiencing homelessness. And if you don't graduate high school, you're 3.5 to 4.5 times more likely to experience homelessness as an adult. And so one of the things that the Cove is seeking to do is to break that cycle. And just kind of a slight aside story.
We got time.
Are we good for time?
Yeah.
My staff laugh at me because I get quite excited about talking about the work that we do, and then I just talk and talk and talk.
That's why you're here.
And talk and talk and talk. But I was thinking, in preparing for this morning, I was thinking about, why do I work at this stage? Why is this stage of life interesting to me? And there's several reasons. When I look back, there's some pretty kind of key incidents. The most recent one would be in 22, I was in San Diego for a conference with educators largely who work with students experiencing homelessness, a national conference. And I don't know if you've been in San Diego in the last kind of 5-10 years, but I was staying on Gaslamp, which is one of the historical districts, and the conference was down by the aircraft carrier Midway, I think. There's a Hilton hotel down there, and that's where the conference was. And every morning I would be walking to and fro, or every day to and fro, and you would pass a large number of people experiencing street homelessness, with often very visible substance use problems, but also some very florid and visible mental ill health. Some of the conversations I had with some of the people as I was walking along were very interesting. One of them walked up and said, "Oh, are you a doctor?" And I was like, "Yes, but not the kind you need." I didn't say that, but it was going on in my head. Because Imago Dei, people are made in the image of God, and we want to treat them with care. And so the jokes that appear in my head sometimes just don't need to come out. And Lauren's laughing at me because she's like, "Yeah, you need to say that to yourself more." And so I sat with a group of the delegates at the conference and said, what's our role working with students in addressing something like we see down the west coast of the United States in terms of the street homelessness and the housing crisis. And the only answer really we had is to turn off the tap. And so when you look at most people who are in that situation of entrenched street homelessness or chronic homelessness, as Housing and Urban Development like to use, most of their issues started in their childhood. And they can usually very clearly articulate to you the chain from an incident in their childhood through to the situation that they are in now. And so the question was, let's turn off the tap. If we can help students experiencing homelessness now and difficulties now have a positive next step during their transition to adulthood and have something hopeful to look forward to, then that is a significant contribution we can make. And so that's why hope is our second outcome, hope in education and employment, and helping our youth lift their heads and see that there is a broader horizon for them. And so we work with MCC, we work with McLennan Community College, Texas State Technical College, and Baylor, and other higher education institutes or training institutes and employers to try and find ways to help our youth lift their heads a bit higher. And so in December, we took some of our youth to an esports tournament at Baylor because they like computer games. It's a growing industry, and there's lots of scholarships for higher education available. And so can we pique their interest and help them see that they could have something after high school? And then quickly, our last outcome is, we call it connection, or building meaningful relational connections. And so the heart of human psychology is relationships. And often, the youth that we're working with have extremely traumatic relationships. There's a lot of abandonment, there's a lot of rejection, a lot of the coping mechanisms are, I'm not going to let you near because I don't want to be hurt again. And so the staff team, we work a lot around these ideas of positive youth development, trauma-informed care, and trust-based relational interventions. We want to recognize that primarily our youth are teenagers. They're people, and they have skills and abilities and interests. And instead of seeing the deficits in their life, we want to help draw out the strength that they have already and build on those. And so that's fundamental to the positive youth development model. And then trauma-informed care, one of the approaches we use, it's used across multiple sectors. It's this idea of, instead of asking the question, what have you done to create this problem, ask the question, what has happened to you? And see people being as individuals who experience both positive and negative outcomes and experiences in their life. And one of the ways that I try and encourage the team and others to talk about is that language around homelessness. Instead of saying you are a homeless person or you are a homeless youth, using language more around you are a young person experiencing homelessness. And it's really, the language there is really important because it's about saying that your identity is a homeless person rather than saying, but instead saying homelessness is an experiencing you are having as a person. Let's find out who the person is and help that person grow despite their experiences.
That's good. In like 1 or 2 minutes, I want you to talk about the relationship between St. Albans and the Cove, and then I want time for folks to ask questions if they'd like.
So Erin and Andrea helped paint our original facility on Washington and 23rd. So the relationship between St. Albans and the Cove goes back since the inception of the Cove. But subsequently, we've got volunteers here in the community, and I'm trying to see Jim's. So Jim's volunteered for the Cove previously, and I'm sorry if I can't. I'm having difficulty
They're out
translating faces into situations. Donations, Cindy White's provided a lot of help over the years. Kelly Atkinson also I mentioned already. Last year we graciously held my trivia night, so look out for that again. I promise to make the questions slightly easier and more approachable.
It's really hard.
I think the winning team had like 68% answers correct. So we'll learn and we'll grow. And the general margin will come up and my questions will go down and we'll kind of meet in the middle somewhere. But events like, and then opportunities like this to talk about the work that we do and just share in a little bit more depth, because I get to talk to a lot of you over time about like how are things going in the Cove, and I love those conversations, but sometimes there's just not enough time to go into a bit more depth.
Yeah. And all of our 5 mission partners, St. Albans financially donates as well to all of the ones that we pray for every week. Receive regular donations every year from us as well. So there's that connection piece too. Yeah. But Tim, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can we give it up for Tim?
Oh, I'm clapping myself.
For Tim or for me about the theology mission, any questions at all that y'all might have? Robert has a mic ready, and I think we have Linda Dyer right here.
So you talked about the inception being almost 10 years. Do you have statistics on the children that you've helped, the young adults, how they've transitioned from your program? Like, you talk about 18-year-olds. That means they're graduating and aging out of almost any assistance they're going to get.
Yeah, it's really varied. I don't have hard numbers because a lot of that happened before I was part of the Cove. What I do know is that over the last 3 years, our students have graduated at least on par with their house peers in the school district, and that we have students that are at TSCC, MCC, Baylor, and other colleges already. Some of them have struggled. It's hard, and we do keep in touch with some of them. In 22, we actually tried to reach out to a number of them to do interviews, and what we found is that most of them have gone through multiple cell phones since we had contact with them. Actually this week, one of our youths brought their younger sibling in for care because she knew that the Cove would be a good place for her. So I'd love to have better numbers about where youth end up. Some of our youth are struggling and using services still. The Adobe Center, for example, which is Behavioral Health Network, works with 18 to 24-year-olds. But it's a mixed picture, and it's one of the areas where I'd like to get more information on. What I found, though, is it's often hard. And even in Edinburgh, where we worked, it was hard because they didn't want to go back to that part of their life and talk about it. But we will time from time, so we have some videos on our website with some of our students talking about what they've done and where they've gone to and things like that as well. So love to know more about it, but kind of there.
When you're dealing with youth, is there any through line with other organizations in Waco? Like, I'm thinking of, I volunteered down at Talitha Coombe, and, we had a 9-year-old who's the primary caregiver for her 5-year-old sister. Like, meals, bathing, the whole. Is there a through line from like that can transition then into the Cove, or?
Again, I don't have I can't tell you like, X% of our youth were previously at Talitha Coombe or something like that, but yeah, all of our youth and their families have largely been high users of services in the community, and so these are youth that largely are well known to discipline services in the schools, well known to counselors, well known to a lot of our youth often have existing casework through the Clara Center for Families for mental health and behavioral health need, and so there is definitely a through line, and how we normally see is, like I just said, we see younger siblings coming in, and so we have multiple youth that we're serving and have served over the last wee while whose older siblings or older cousins the Cove served back in 2016, 2017, and so the answer to your question is yes, there is a through line, and it usually comes down to that poverty issue of that, because poverty comes with so many other issues. They are often high users of services, but often what we also see is it's sporadic and problematic usage, so it's in and out of services.
Last question here with Troy.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim, for all of this. But I was wondering, like, Can you talk more about the volunteer opportunities for like
I'd
normal
love to,
people
Troy.
like me, and
Yeah.
like how we can get involved? Like, are you looking for certain skill sets, etc.?
Yeah. Yeah, so we, can I do my whole broad
You
kind
can
of...
do,
Yeah,
for sure.
It'll
Yeah.
take 2 minutes maximum. So volunteering, after school volunteering, Monday through Thursday. The commitment we ask of people for that is to commit 1 evening a week for a semester, and it's about 3 hours. And the role there is to help our youth engage with the program, so building kind of positive relationships with them, and helping serve meals, helping around the facility, just being there and present and encouraging. So, and there's a form on our website if you're interested in that, so you can just fill that out, and my colleague Lexi will follow up with that. Through the year, if you sign up to our newsletter or follow our socials at The Cove Waco on Instagram and Facebook, then often we'll blast out like leads through that model, and it's also just a good way to keep on top of, keep in touch with the things that are happening or particular needs. And we do staff and volunteer profiles, or we talk about specific situations and case studies, or we say, hey, we really need these donations, but please don't send us toothpaste, because we have like, you know, a lifetime supply of toothpaste at the moment.
Can I get some toothpaste?
But also, other good ways is we do have a merchandise store, so shop.thecovewaco.org. You can link through our website as well. Like we have like Cove branded stuff, and like everything purchased a little bit kind of financially comes. We're a non-profit, and over half of our income comes from individual donations, but also like civic organizations and churches and corporate sponsorship. So we have like a business, like corporate recognition program, so like with branding awareness. And we will have a fundraiser later in the year, again, kind of gala-style fundraiser, a little silent auction, live auction, things like that. And then the fundraiser, so last year the fundraiser that we held here raised just over $1,900 for the Cove, which equates to about an evening's worth of services. So there's multiple ways, and if you have a question about any of those specifically, then I'd love to talk to you.
Yeah.
We also take Bitcoin and XRP and Tesla stock, you know, anything like that is totally fine.
Here's my Venmo.
We have a Venmo, actually.
I've got to cut it off there.
Yeah.
I've got to go to church. But also on St. Albans websites, we have links to all of our partners as well. Let's thank Tim again for being here.